After grieving the death of her husband, Teresa Watson found the strength to start a new life. 10 years later, when she thought she had all she wanted, she accidentally discovered a secret that changed the way she looked back at her first marriage forever. Teresa Watson met the love of her life, Sean Morris, in high school through mutual friends, and the connection was instant. Sean, the quarterback of the school football team, quickly captured Teresa's heart. They soon fell deeply in love and became inseparable. 1 year turned into 2, then 3, and before Teresa knew it, they had graduated both high school and college together. Sean earned a bachelor's degree in engineering, while Teresa completed her bachelor's degree in psychology. On the night of their graduation party, in front of family and friends, Sean got down on one knee and asked Teresa to marry him. Overwhelmed with joy, she said yes. They tied the knot a year later, and Teresa couldn't have been happier, though she would later learn that Sean apparently could have been. 4 years passed, and Teresa believed their marriage was going well and couldn't be better. Up until this point, their relationship had been uncomplicated, and Teresa was content. She preferred stability and safe routines over unpredictability. However, one fateful day, after finishing up with a client at work, she checked her phone and noticed several missed calls from an unknown number. When she returned the call, it connected her to the local police department. Apparently, on his way to work, Sean had gotten into a horrible car accident on the freeway. Teresa ran to her car and sped to the hospital. Her husband was in critical condition, but doctors had hoped he would make it out alive. Her family and his family came to support her, and in a way, it was good that they did, because Sean's condition worsened, and only 2 days after the accident, he passed away. Teresa was utterly devastated and couldn't believe her perfect life with Sean. She wasn't ready to say goodbye. They'd never even had children together, which is something they'd been wanting to do for a long time. Teresa and Sean had seen several doctors, but apparently the problem was on her side. While Sean had no troubles with himself from the tests that were done on him, it was revealed that Teresa was infertile. Sean had reassured her. They'd get through it together. However, before they could even discuss other possibilities and ways of having children, he passed away. Teresa tried to move on, but she had spent half of her life with Sean. She couldn't recover that easily. She took not a few weeks, but a few months off of work. The irony was, as a psychologist, she knew what she was doing was detrimental. However, she withdrew herself from her family and friends, isolating herself. The degree she'd worked so hard for now tired her. 10 years after her husband's death, Teresa had moved out of the big house and was now living in the next city over. Realizing her old relationship had lacked spontaneity, she downloaded a dating app and decided to give it a try, just for fun. However, in her first match, she met a genuinely nice guy. While she was 36, he was 39, and while Sean had been a thinner, dirty blonde, this man was a tall and more muscular brunette with scruff included. Teresa didn't put much thought into swiping right, but also didn't think she could have as much chemistry as she did with someone over text. But she did. And before she knew it, she was on a date with this man, whose name was Walter Bennett. He was a writer and traveled to different locations all over the world to write interesting pieces for a travel magazine. Teresa's life had been boring up until she met Walter, and soon she was accompanying him on his trips. Teresa had never been out of the United States, but was enjoying going to Italy, Paris, Morocco, and Australia, all in such short spans of time and close together. After only 3 months of dating Walter, he proposed to her in Portugal after a romantic dinner, and she had no doubts in her mind that he was the one for her. She said yes, and they eloped the same night. She had never met his entire family. She had seen his mother once, but his father had passed away, and his sister had been in a different city at the time, but moved back when her own partner died, whom she had a son with. But after the proposal, it was arranged for Teresa to finally meet his sister, Anne, who was 30 years old. When Teresa met Anne, she greeted her with a warm smile, but her new sister-in-law looked like she'd seen a ghost. Teresa also immediately took to Anne's son, who was 6 years old. He looked oddly familiar to her, but she couldn't figure out why. Walter found his sister's nervous greeting to Teresa weird, but when he asked her about it later, she acted oblivious. Teresa had also had suspicions but didn't say anything to Walter, and instead kept playing with Anne's son, wishing she had kids of her own. She and Walter had discussed children. He was more than patient and understanding with her when she first confessed her infertility to him. He said that in a few years, when they were ready, they could adopt. He did want to have 1 or 2 kids eventually, but for now, he was fine enjoying his new marriage with Teresa. One afternoon, Teresa had to do some cleaning and decided now that she was married to Walter, she needed to have a clean slate and get rid of some of Scene's things that she'd been holding onto for so long. When going through Scene's old things, however, she came across a cell phone, only it wasn't his normal cell phone. His had been blue, but this one was black. Luckily, it didn't have a password, so Teresa had no trouble opening it. But then, she couldn't believe her eyes. Soon enough, she was scrolling through messages Scene had not exchanged with her, but with another woman. Hundreds of messages that dated back to 8 years earlier, and these weren't simple pleasantries but very explicit and scandalous texts. That he had never exchanged with her, his lawfully wedded wife. All this time, she had thought their marriage had been perfect, but it turned out that she had been blind to reality. She had never been suspicious. She had no reason to be. After all, Scene had come home every night at the same hour and spent every weekend by her side. How had he even found the time for an affair? Teresa was hurt. She felt betrayed, and her rage made her go into detective mode. She quickly looked up the phone number on the internet, and her jaw dropped when the results popped up. Anne Bennett. That's why she had looked at Teresa so weirdly. Without telling Walter, she drove to Anne's house and banged on the door. Anne opened up, surprised to see her. But part of her knew that Teresa knew about her affair with Scene. Knowing there was no avoiding it, Anne invited her sister-in-law inside. Teresa, although shaking from anger, calmly held up Scene's old phone and demanded answers, but she could have never prepared herself for what happened next. Anne explained that she had met Scene at a bar when he had gone out with some of his co-workers. She was 22 at the time, and he was 25. 3 years into his marriage with Teresa, she hadn't known he was married at first, but even after discovering the truth, she had been easily manipulated into an affair. His weekday outings with friends had been his preferred cover. What shocked Teresa the most, however, was learning that the primary reason for his infidelity was her inability to have children. Scene had confided in Anne, telling her that since his wife couldn't give him children, he wanted her to be the one to fulfill that role. 2 years later, she had given birth to their son. It was no wonder he looked so familiar to Teresa. He was her husband's son. Overwhelmed, Teresa left without saying a word and broke down sobbing in her car. When her husband came home later that night, she was still in tears. She wasted no time explaining everything to him, and he was overcome with shock and rage. He realized that yelling at his sister, no matter how much he wanted to, wouldn't change anything. Instead, he chose to cut off all ties with her. A few years later, they moved far away from Tara. Teresa, who had once struggled to have children, now had 2 daughters with Walter. Despite the devastation she endured, she finally found her happy ending. I'm really keen to know your thoughts on this story, so please don't hesitate to share your insights in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and found it engaging, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more similar content. Feel free to share this video. Take good care of yourselves, and I'm excited to connect with you in our future videos.